At New Year, he'd given Anne Boleyn a present of silver forks with handles of rock crystal. He hopes she will use them to eat with, not to stick in people. From Venice. She's pleased. She holds them up so the handles catch and splinter the light. He's brought another present for her to pass on. It's wrapped in a piece of sky blue silk. He says it's for that little girl who always cries. Anne's mouth opens a little. Jane Seymour, she says. Don't you know? Her eyes brim with black glee. Come, so I can tell you in your ear. Now we understand why we never see Sir John, Anne murmurs. Now we know what he does down in the country. Hunting, I thought, he says. Yes, and he's netted. Catherine Philol, Edward's wife. They were taken in the act, but I can't find out where, whether in her bed or his, or a meadow, a hayloft. Oh, yes, cold to be sure, but they were keeping each other warm. And now Sir John has confessed it all, man to man, telling his son to his face that he's had his wife every week since the wedding. She's to be put in a convent. I think he should put her in a cage. He's asking for an annulment. As for dear Sir John, I think we will not see him at court soon. And the daughter, he says, Jane, is it? Anne sniggers. Pasty face. Gone down to Wiltshire. Her best move will be to follow the sister-in-law into a nunnery. Her sister Lizzie married well, but no one wants milksop, and now no one will. Her eyes fall on his present. She says, suddenly anxious, jealous, what is it? It's only a book of needlework patterns, he says. Oh, as long as it's nothing to tax her wits. Why would you send her a present? I feel sorry for her, he says. More now, of course. Oh. You don't like her, do you? The correct answer is no, my Lady Anne. I only like you.
Hi Hilary, thanks so much for coming in to talk to us today about Wolf Hall. Claire Armistead, the Guardian's literary editor, called you the best kept secret in English fiction. Did you expect that this would be the book to make your name, or fictionalised life of Thomas Cromwell?
What I'm doing now is something I've never done before. I'm moving right onto the centre ground of English history, and onto the centre ground of the perception of Englishness. This is so much part of our myth and our construction of ourselves. I made it difficult for myself by choosing one of the most unpopular figures in English history. I could have gone for Thomas More, after all, the saint in the stained glass window.
Yeah. He comes in for a really hard time, doesn't he, in your book?
Yes. I don't think I've been totally unsympathetic, but I think I've been much more realistic.
Yeah.
You know, Robert Bolt's portrait of Thomas More as a 1960s Liberal never really did wash. I wanted people to wipe out some of their preconceptions and start again. To my amazement and joy, people have been willing to do that. They're ready for a fresh approach.
The passage that you've just read from, as well as showing the atmosphere of conspiracy and rumour and jostling for position that goes on at Henry's court, also brings into play these two women, Anne Boleyn and Jane Seymour, who have a huge influence over Thomas Cromwell's life.
Anne Boleyn was an enigmatic, many-sided person. In the way I run the story through in Wolf Hall, she's a rather cold-eyed, selfish, calculating schemer. But I can imagine writing another novel in which she was the heroine. As for Jane Seymour, she's a very effaced character. She's almost a blank in English history, except for this one important thing she did, which was to give Henry the son that he'd been longing and intriguing for. So I decided that I was going to write up Jane Seymour. As there is a blank, I can project something into it. Anne Boleyn calls her milksop, and she's really disdainful and scornful of her. But I'm raising the possibility that quiet little Jane, demure little Jane, is plotting away busily in the background, unobserved by anyone. If Anne could plot during the reign of Catherine of Aragon, why not Jane Seymour during Anne's period of power? You see, I don't think she could have been as brainless as the men of the time thought she was.
So do you think that's the ongoing fascination of the Tudors for us then, that they represent a space into which we can project our own views of them?
I think that's part of the fascination. I mean, historically, it's a very gripping period of English history, the 1530s. It's a period of tremendous political change and a clash of ideologies. But also on the human level, you have these great archetypes striding across the stage. Henry as Bluebeard, Catherine as the patient Griselda, the long-suffering wife who put up with almost anything. And you've got Anne as the minx and the schemer, the mistress, waiting in the wings. And they're all types we know. Maybe we've even been them.
You're an author who's written sort of very powerfully about contemporary Britain, but also you've gone back in time and explored history. What's your position on the genre of historical fiction? Does it have less weight and less relevance than fiction that deals with the here and now? The
label historical fiction has been applied to a certain type of book, which is very much within a genre. It's a body ripper, it's a romance.
Jean Slady, Anya Seton.
Which depends on the perception of the people of the past being just like us, which they were not. You see in people's behaviour, for example, you read their letters, which is about the best access we have to them. And you see huge psychological differences. I think one of the things that you have to bear in mind is how short life was, how perilous life was, and how little expectation one had of living into middle age, and the peril that every woman encountered in childbirth, and the fact that the generations were so short that you were lucky if you knew your grandparents. And to think about your own grandchildren meant a great stretch of the imagination, because you might very well never see them. And this was a time, particularly the 1530s, when almost every summer there was a huge epidemic, some kind of very grave influenza, meningitis. We don't quite know what it was. And every year this was wiping out thousands of young people in the prime of their lives.
And that's what happened to Thomas Cromwell's family at the beginning.
Yes.
Which I thought was an incredibly affecting part of the book, when he loses first his wife and then his daughters.
His two daughters, yes.
Sort of waves of
and we can't be sure of their dates of death, but they probably were taken in these summer epidemics and within a couple of years of each other. But he's a very resilient character. It takes him half a page to bounce back, and then he's climbing again through the hierarchy of English society.
And you're actually going to read now from a point later in the book when he's really sort of reaching the apex of his power.
Yes, Cromwell is opening up opportunities for Henry, particularly opportunities of making money, which Henry is very keen to grasp, and you can see them egging each other on. They're not walking a straight line, they're moving one way and then slightly overcorrecting, but they are shackled together and swaying off in the same direction. Cromwell has other propositions to put to the king. Christ did not bestow on his followers grants of land or monopolies. All these things are the business of the secular power. A man who's taken vows of poverty, how can he have property rights? How can a monk be a landlord? The king says, Cromwell, with your facility for large numbers. He stares into the distance. His fingers pick at the silver lacing of his cuff. The legislative body, Cromwell says, should provide for the maintenance of priests and bishops. After that, it should be able to use the church's wealth for the public good. But how to free it, Henry says. I suppose shrines can be broken. Jem studied himself. He thinks of the kind of wealth you can weigh. If there were any who dared, he says. It's characteristic of Henry to run before you to where you were not quite going. He had meant to gentle him towards an intricate legal process of dispossession, repossession, the assertion of ancient sovereign rights, the taking back of what was always yours. He will remember that it was Henry who first suggested picking up a chisel and gouging the sapphire eyes out of saints. Would you be able to estimate, Henry says? Even... No, I suppose not. Gets to his feet. Well, the sun shines, so better make hay. Cromwell sweeps the day's papers together. I'll finish up.
It seemed that you began by drawing for us a much more sympathetic portrait than the historical one that we, the black and white one that we know of him as Henry's ruthless fixer. But then, as we move towards the end of the book, he seems to be moving more and more into the recognised historical role, sort of filling it out slowly.
I think when I started out writing, I felt, much like other people do about Cromwell, I felt that his bad reputation must be deserved, and that he was a very ruthless and manipulative character. Now, I haven't really changed my mind on that, but as I looked into it more closely, well, two things happened. One is I just began to like him. I began to admire how clever he was. And the other thing was, I started to panic. I thought, what if he's not bad enough? What will I do? And then I came to the conclusion, yes, he's quite bad enough to carry this narrative along, but in interesting ways, and not in these pantomime villain ways. He's constantly enigmatic, he's changeable, he's as unpredictable to the person writing about him as his contemporaries found him. And it seems to me that he must have been a man who didn't talk a lot about his past and created, as it were, a black space, a blank space, or perhaps carried a mirror for people, so that when they looked at him, what they saw bouncing back was their own fear, their own projections. His past life, which was so mysterious, this time of his life where he'd been knocking around in Europe. I don't think he stitched it together for people, but I think he was a mystery to his contemporaries. And I think that's important in the relationship between writer and reader. If you've sorted it all out and you think you know that person, it's sterile, it's dead on the page. But Cromwell is constantly surprising me.
Yes. And certainly when you're reading it, you think you've got him pegged as one thing, one sort of a man, and then he does something completely different, and you have to work out why. So it becomes an interactive process, I think.
Yes, that's right. And what I've been trying to do is catch the flow of thought. And you see him manoeuvring for advantage in every situation, every conversation. You are right there as it happens moment by moment. This often seems to be missing from the historical novel. The story stays on the surface. It doesn't try to construct a rounded human being. It's quite an ambitious agenda when you think you also have to keep the reader very informed of the political world, the world of fact, the world of macro history. Yes.
But also, in a sense, as a reader of a book like this, you feel implicated in a way, because we can see that some of the decisions that he's making and the acts that he's performing aren't particularly savoury, but you can always see how he's ended up there.
Yes, I think implicated is a good word. You're almost complicit.
Yes.
Because by the end of it, you will be asking yourself, in his situation, what would I have done?
Wouldn't I have done the same?
Yes. Once you realise the great cause here is Thomas Cromwell, and the furtherance of Thomas Cromwell by any means necessary, then you've grasped what you need to know, and you are involved, and hopefully you are on his side. His are the eyes through which you are seeing the Tudor world.
Well, thanks very much indeed for coming in to talk to us about Walpole.
Thank you.